Hey folks, welcome back to the table. This is the Summoner's Circle podcast. I'm your host, Vince. Today is starting season 2, episode 6. Today we're talking a little about something a little bit that sits right in the intersection of mechanics, tone, and memory. The kind of encounter your players will still be talking about years later, even if they forget the dungeon map, treasure haul, or the exact stat blocks or whatever. We're talking about running summoners as villains, and we've all probably tried this or done this, or maybe you even thought about the idea. Not as we're not going to run them as a weird NPC, not as a background cultist, not as a guy in a robe you stab into and he's pretty much dead. I mean, full on, prepared, patient, dangerous summoner. The kind that turn a normal boss fight into something uncomfortable, something tense, something that feels like the world is pushing back. And this fits the show for a couple reasons. Touch upon those as we go. Earlier episodes talked about Diabolists and Summoners as player characters, how they work, why they're strange, why they reward patience and planning. Today we flip the chair around and look at them from the other side of the screen. Because everything that makes Summoners tricky for players is exactly what makes them terrifying as villains. Let me start with the core idea here because if you miss this, nothing else matters. A summoner villain does not fight fair whatsoever. And that's not because they cheat, not because they are overpowered. It's because they don't believe in fair fights. They believe in preparation. That's the difference. If you design a summoner villain the same way you design a warlord, a dragon, or a necromancer, you're gonna to end up with something like that's gonna fall flat. You have an interesting stat block that dies like everything else, and it's not gonna be memorable at all. But if you lean into what Palladium actually gives you, summoners become a different category of threat entirely. Here's the hook I want you to keep in your head the whole time when you're building this kind of encounter of a summoner as your main villain. Your players think the summoner is the boss. The summoner thinks the demon is. They're both wrong. The one idea can carry the entire adventure, sometimes an entire campaign arc, depending on how you. Let's talk about why this works so well in Palladium Fantasy. First, summoners don't rely on initiative, they rely on setup. In Palladium, summoning magic is slow, deliberate, and rigorous. It requires circle, components, time, and a hell of a lot of willpower. That means anyone who uses it seriously is already thinking ahead of time, preparing. A summoner villain doesn't wait in a room hoping the party shows up. They choose where they'll. They shape the space around them. They prepare for intrusion. That alone puts them miles ahead of most of the enemies you probably aimed up or planned up. Second, summoners outsource violence. This is huge, and it's something a lot of GMs underuse. A summoner doesn't not need to be physically dangerous. They don't need high attacks. They don't need impressive armor. They bring something else into the room that doesn't fight for them. Demons, elementals, entities don't care about your party's plans or your sense of balance. And here's the important part. Those entities, they're not loyal. They are bound. That's a massive difference. Every demon in a summoner's encounter should feel like a loaded weapon that might go off in the wrong direction at any really particular moment. That tension should always be present, even if the summoner currently has control. Now, let's talk about something that separates memorable summoner villains from the forgettable one, telegraphing. If the first time your players realize they're dealing with the summoner is when the demon appears in the middle of combat, you skip the best part. Summoners announce themselves through evidence, not speech. The world should show signs of their presence long before confrontation happens. Protection circles carved into stone floors, chalk symbols smeared on old doors, unnatural geometric scratched altars. Animals refusing to enter certain ruins, livestock found drained, mauled, people disappearing near old sites with bad reputation. Rumors matter here. Villagers talk about strange lights at night. Travelers report hearing voices where no one's. Hunters refuse to go to certain places because of creepy. None of this requires exposition. None of this requires lore dump. It just creates an unease. And here's what happens when players put those pieces together. They slow down. They stop charging into rooms. They stop assuming they're in control. They start asking smart questions, just questions in general. That's engagement. That's what. Now, Let's talk about the summoner's lair, because this is where a lot of the encounters either shine or really fall apart. A summoner should never be fought in space. Well, no tavern brawls, no roadside ambushes, no random clearings. The lair of the summoner is the extension of their magic. That's where the magic happens. Old ruins are perfect. Collapsed temples, flat stone floor, abandoned fortifications, anywhere circles can be drawn, protected by the. Here's a practical GM tip that matters more than you think. Do not hide all the circles. Let the players actually see them. The moment a party walks into a chamber and sees a protected circle already in place, that kind of changes the tone of everything. Now, they're not just thinking about attacks, they're thinking their option. Can the circle be broken? Can it be disrupted? Can it be bypassed? That turns into a small fight into a problem. Now, let's talk about the summoners themselves here, because we've been talking about them encircling around a circle. Ha ha. Because betrayal really matters when it comes to the summoners. A summoner villain should not open with violence on their action. They open with confidence. They know they're protected. Something worse is coming. They know the party is already. This is a great moment for dialogue, but not really a long speech. Sure, you can be a Bond villain, tell us everything that you're going to do, but not too long. Maybe just a little gloating is fine. Short statement, calm observation, something like, you shouldn't be here. You don't understand what you're interrupting. Leave now. If the party pushes, the summoner will escalate, not by attacking, by finishing some. A chant completes, a candle flares, blood hits the stone. Who knows? That's when the initiative really starts to matter, and this is where you avoid a common mistake. Do not make the demon the boss and the summoner an afterthought. The summoner remains relevant the entire time. They're issuing the commands, they're maintaining control, they're reacting disruption. This is where Palladium's control mechanics shine. Mental endurance rolls, battle of wills, and resisting domination. The fight is not just physical, it's psychological. Players notice when the demon hesitates. They realize control isn't exactly just perfect. They smell weaknesses, that creates opportunities for. What's talking about next, breaking the setup, because this is where players feel clever and Palladium rewards clever play. Circles can be disrupted, sure. It's not easy and it's probably not always done safely, but they can be disrupted. Chalk can be smeared, carvings can be damaged, power sources can be interrupted. Every one of these actions should carry a certain amount of risk. Breaking a circle might release something, who knows? Interrupting a ritual might cause backlash. Damaging a power circle might destabilize the entire chamber. This is not a puzzle with one right answer. It's a dangerous situation full of bad choices. And that's Palladium in a nutshell. Now, talking about things, let's talk about the failure of the situation, because this is where a lot of GMs get nervous. If the party loses to a summoner villain, the campaign should not exactly end. It should change the tone of it. Summoners don't usually kill useful captives. They bind them, they drain them, they experiment with. Characters might wake up inside imperfect circles, weakened, marked, stripped of gear. Now the goal isn't victory, it's kind of how am I going to escape this situation? Escape sessions are one of the strongest and memorable things in pretty much any fantasy. Players are cautious, they're creative, they're tense, but in a good way. It's a fun way. They learn more about the villain they never would have ever thought in a straight fight. They see the summoner's habits, they see the demon's resentment, see the cracks in the setup, and that sets up return confrontation that feels earned. That is where I want to pause for a moment, because we've covered the philosophy, the tone, the structure. What what we'll talk about next, we'll get a little more concrete with our specific encounter instructors using demon-stable allies instead of obedient pets. What happens when control break and fight, and how to end a summoning arc or be with a clean. That's where the real payoff. So let's get a little more concrete now, because philosophy is only useful if it turns into something you can actually run. I want to talk about encounter structure, because summoner villains fall apart fast if you treat them like a single room, and that, frankly, is boring. A summoner encounter should feel layered, but not too complicated, but just layered. There's a difference in terms of approach, disruption, confrontation, and aftermath. Not acts, not phases, just pressure. Like the approach is where tension starts. The party is moving towards the summoner's location, and things feel wards that don't trigger on them, but clearly exist. Circles that are inactive, but signs that someone else came here but didn't. This is where players should start realizing they're not walking to a fair fight. Disruption phase happens before initiative. That is where smart parties try to interfere. They break symbols, they steal components, they interrupt preparation. Let them. Never let them do it for free, though. Every disruption is a consequence. Breaking a chalk circle might alert the summoner. Smearing a ruin might weaken the demon's binding but destabilize the area. Stealing a component might force the summoner to rush the ritual instead of kind of delaying it. This is where everything really shines for Palladium, because the rules don't require you to invent outcomes. The system already supports the backlash and imperfect. Then comes the confrontation. This is where a lot of GMs make a mistake of thinking the fight will be explosive right away, and it doesn't. A summoner confrontation works best when it starts control. Summoner behind a protection circle, the demon restrained but present. The party aware that violence will make things worse before being better. This is where players talk more than they swing swords. Threats get made, bargains get floated, bluffs happen, and the summoner should not be bluffing. They should be believing they're winning, because right now they are. Now, the demons themselves, let's talk a little bit about them, because that's the most important piece to get right in this situation. Demons are not extensions of the summoner. They are separate characters in the scene. They have their own motives. They resent being bound. They despise weakness. They are constantly looking for any type of leverage. Even when controlled, the demon should feel like it's watching everyone in the room, not just the party. This is where you really lean into some description. The demon reacts when the summoner is in it. It reacts when the circle flickers. It reacts when somebody says the summoner's name. These aren't mechanics, they're just little players should realize slowly that the demon is not exactly loyal. And when control starts to slip, that realization becomes panic. Now, let's talk about control breaking, because that is where the summoner encounters become legendary. When control breaks, do not default to demon just attacking the party. I am demon, I will attack. That's predictable. Instead, ask yourself a simple question. Who does the demon hate the most in this room? Sometimes, well, probably some more than sometimes. It's most of the time, it's the summoner. Sometimes it's the weakest party member. Sometimes it's just anyone who doesn't wear jib. Sometimes the demon doesn't attack at all. Sometimes it laughs, makes an offer. This is where Palladium allows you to do something most systems struggle with. Let the fight turn sideways. A demon might turn on the summoner and drag them into the circle. A demon might bargain with the party for freedom. A demon might try to escape entirely, turning the encounter into damage control instead of victory. Imagine that, a demon running wild as he was summoned to carry chaos. None of these outcomes are really failure, they're all story accelerants. Talking about other things here like pacing, because the summoner encounters can drag if you're not really careful. The key is urgency without artificial. Don't say you have 3 rounds. Say the chant is almost complete. Don't say the demon gets stronger every turn. Show it straining against the circle. Show cracks forming. Show blood pooling where it shouldn't. Players don't need numbers to feel pressure. They need consequences. Now let's talk about player role, because every character should matter in this kind of encounter. The fighter isn't just here to hit things. They break circles. They shove enemies into dangerous spaces. They physically disrupt the environment. The thief-like character isn't just backstabbing. They're cutting ritual cords. They're stealing components. They sabotage symbols. The mages aren't just casting damage. They're countering energies. They identify weak points. They recognize what happened was wrong. The group isn't just fighting a monster. They're dismantling a situation, and that's why encounters stick. So, okay, we've talked about all these things. What about losing? Because this is where a summoner villain really separates themselves from standard bosses. If the party loses, it's not the pivoting. Summoners, again, don't kill useful captives. They bind them, they drain them, they study them. Characters waked up, restrained, inside flawed circles, weakened, disoriented, and marked. Now the game becomes something else. We talked about escape, turning the summoner's tools against them. These sessions are incredible. Players stop thinking in terms of building and start thinking in terms of survival. They notice details, they exploit habits, they learn the summoner's weakness, and they finally escape the rematch. So, how do we end the summoner arc? Because this matters more than the fight itself. A summoner should not always die. Sometimes they escape and become a reoccurring villain threat for the campaign, which is a lot of fun and memorable. Sometimes they are consumed by the thing they thought they controlled. Sometimes they leaving behind consequences, closure. The worst ending for a summoner villain is simply a corpse and a loot. Instead, think about the aftermath of it. What happens to the site? What happens to the demony site? What rumors spread afterward? Maybe the land remains tainted. Maybe something else noticed the disturbance. Maybe the party inherits a dangerous location they now have to deal with. That's how one villain becomes campaign threat. Now, let me give you a concrete example because this always does. I once ran a summoner who never attacked the party directly. Every encounter was shaped by preparation. Every fight involved something. When they finally cornered him, control slipped. The demon didn't attack the party. It grabbed him and dragged him screaming into the circle. The party didn't cheer. They just stood there quietly fused. That silence told me everything. Now let me zoom out here for a minute and bring you back to the core of Game Fantasy. Why does this work so well here? Because the system supports preparation, stability, and consequence. You're not forcing the game differently. You're using it as written. Control mechanics matter, environment matters, time matters. Summoner villains aren't about overpowering players. They're about outthinking. And when a player wins, it feels earned. When they lose, it feels fair. That's rare. So here's my challenge to you as GMs out there. Next time you design a major villain, don't start with stats. Start with questions. Where do they feel safe? What have they prepared? What happens if the control breaks? If those answers shape the battlefield, get right. That's why summoners do make a powerful villain. They turn a fight into a memory, and that's what we're all for. All right, I think I'm gonna wrap it up here. Next episode, we'll shift gears and get practical in different ways. Adventures you can drop into a Palladium Fantasy campaign with almost no prep. I don't know. I'm thinking about that if I have enough time in the next week or so to jot down these ideas. Otherwise, I'll just think of something. Until then, you keep your circle sealed. Don't trust anything that offers you a deal. And remember, the real danger usually started long before you arrived. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel if it's your first time here. Don't forget to like on Spotify or anything or Apple Podcasts. Give us a rating. Also, head over to patreon.com/theevildm and you can get a newsletter that I weekly started last week as of the recording. It's called Borderland Threats, which gives you a Palladium idea you can drop right into your campaign. I'll see you next time. Keep it original, keep it old school. Good night, and God bless everybody.